The strange feeling of knowing something you can't remember. You've probably experienced this before. You see someone in public and immediately know you've met them before. Their face is familiar. Their voice feels familiar. Something in your mind recognizes them instantly. But their name? Gone. Where you met them? No idea. The strange part is that this doesn't feel like complete forgetting. It feels like the answer is there somewhere. You can almost reach it. It's sitting just outside your awareness. Most people treat moments like this as memory failures. They're not. They're evidence of something much more interesting. Your brain knows more than your conscious mind can access. And once you understand this, a lot of your everyday experiences start making more sense. Not just memory, your habits, your emotions, your decisions, your confidence, even the way you see yourself. Because what you consciously know is only a small fraction of what's actually happening inside your mind. Most people assume that if they can't remember something, it's gone. That's not how memory works. Your brain isn't a filing cabinet where information either exists or disappears. It's closer to a massive network. Information gets stored in connections, patterns, associations, and experiences that interact with one another. The problem isn't always storage. The problem is access. Think about your phone for a moment. You probably have thousands of photos. Could you describe photo number 2847 right now? Of course not. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. The information exists. You simply don't have immediate access to it. Your mind works in a similar way. Over the course of your life, you've accumulated an unbelievable amount of information. Every conversation, every classroom, every mistake, every embarrassing moment, every lesson, every face you've seen, every environment you've spent time in. Your brain doesn't perfectly store all of it, but it stores far more than you realize. The reason this matters is because many people underestimate themselves. They assume they only possess the knowledge they can consciously recall at any moment. That's like standing in a library and believing you only own the books currently open on the table. The rest are still there. You just aren't looking at them. This is one reason why people often surprise themselves. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone asked a question and you suddenly explained something you didn't realize you knew? The knowledge seemed to appear from nowhere. Except it didn't. Your brain had been building that understanding for years. The right question simply unlocked it. Or maybe you've read a book and felt like nothing was sticking. Then months later, you find yourself applying ideas from that book without consciously remembering where they came from. The information didn't disappear. It became part of the background operating system of your mind. This happens more often than most people realize. Your brain is constantly absorbing patterns. Not just facts, patterns. And patterns are often more valuable than facts. You don't consciously remember every sentence you've ever heard in your native language, but somehow you can speak it. You don't remember every face you've ever seen, but you can instantly recognize familiar people. You don't remember every social interaction you've ever had, but you've developed an intuition about people. Your brain is extracting lessons beneath the surface. This is where many people get confused. They think learning only counts when they can consciously explain something. But some of the most important learning happens below conscious awareness. Imagine teaching someone how to ride a bicycle. You can explain balance. You can explain steering. You can explain momentum. But eventually, the person has to feel it. At some point, knowledge becomes embodied. It moves from conscious effort into automatic capability. You stop thinking about it, yet you've never known it better. The same thing happens in creative work. A writer doesn't consciously remember every article they've read. A designer doesn't consciously remember every design they've studied. An entrepreneur doesn't consciously remember every business lesson they've encountered. But those experiences accumulate. They form patterns. They shape judgment. They influence decisions. The person often can't point to a specific source, yet the knowledge is there, stored beneath the surface. This is one reason experience matters so much. Experience isn't just about collecting memories. It's about building invisible mental models. The longer you live, the more these models grow. The more situations your brain has encountered, the more patterns it can recognize, the more connections it can make. And most of this happens automatically, without your permission, without your awareness, without you noticing. That's both fascinating and important, because many people spend years believing they know less than they actually do. They confuse recall with intelligence. They confuse immediate access with actual capability. They assume that because an answer isn't instantly available, it doesn't exist. But if you've ever solved a problem while taking a shower, remembered a forgotten name hours later, or suddenly understood something after struggling with it for weeks, you've already seen the truth. Your mind is doing work even when you're not consciously directing it. There is far more happening beneath the surface than you can see. The question isn't whether your brain stores more than you can access. It does. The real question is how much of your life is being influenced by information you've forgotten, experiences you barely remember, and patterns you've never consciously noticed. And once you start exploring that question, you begin to see your mind very differently. Your conscious mind is surprisingly small. Most people spend their lives assuming that their conscious thoughts represent the majority of what their brain is doing. It feels that way. After all, your conscious experience is the only part you can directly observe. You hear your thoughts. You feel your emotions. You make decisions. You pay attention to what's happening around you. From your perspective, that seems like the whole story, but it isn't. In reality, conscious awareness is more like a small control panel connected to an incredibly large system operating in the background. The strange thing is that you only see the control panel. You don't see the machinery. Imagine sitting in the driver's seat of a car. You can steer, you can accelerate, you can brake, but you don't see thousands of moving parts working together underneath the hood. The fact that you can't see them doesn't mean they aren't there. Your mind works in much the same way. Most of the processing that keeps your life running never reaches conscious awareness. Your brain is constantly filtering information. Right now, as you're reading this, your nervous system is processing thousands of signals. The pressure of your body against a chair, the temperature of the room, background sounds, visual information in your peripheral vision, the position of your arms, the position of your legs, the rhythm of your breathing, the beating of your heart. You aren't consciously tracking most of these things. Your brain is handling them automatically. If every piece of information entered conscious awareness at the same time, your experience would become overwhelming almost instantly. This is one of the primary jobs of the brain, not to show you everything, to hide most things from you. That may sound strange at first, but think about it. The goal of your brain is not perfect awareness. The goal is effective action. Your brain evolved to help you survive and function, not to provide a complete report of reality. This means your brain is constantly deciding what deserves your attention and what can remain in the background. You can think of attention as a spotlight. Wherever the spotlight points becomes your conscious experience. Everything outside the spotlight still exists. You're just not actively aware of it. This explains why you can become completely absorbed in a book and stop noticing sounds around you. It explains why you sometimes drive home without consciously remembering parts of the trip. It explains why people often fail to notice obvious details when they're focused on something else. The information may have reached the brain. It's simply never reached awareness. This distinction is important because many people assume that awareness equals reality. What they notice becomes what they believe exists. But awareness is selective. It's a filter, and every filter removes information. Your experience of reality is not reality itself. It's a simplified version your brain creates so you can navigate the world efficiently. This is also why your memory feels incomplete. Only a small percentage of what your brain processes becomes part of conscious experience. And only a small percentage of conscious experience becomes a long-term memory. The funnel narrows at every stage. Think about yesterday. You lived through an entire day, thousands of sights, thousands of sounds, countless thoughts, countless sensations. Yet what remains available now? A handful of moments, a few highlights, a few emotionally significant events, maybe a conversation, maybe a meal, maybe something that frustrated you. The vast majority never made it through the filter, not because it wasn't important at the time, because your brain has limited resources. It must prioritize. This realization can be surprisingly helpful. Many people become frustrated with themselves because they forget things. They assume forgetting means they weren't paying attention, or that something is wrong with their memory. But forgetting is often evidence that the system is working exactly as designed. Your brain is constantly asking a simple question: what is useful enough to keep? Most information doesn't pass that test, and that's okay. Imagine trying to remember every leaf you've ever seen, every passing car, every sentence spoken by strangers, every item in every store you've entered. The volume would be impossible to manage. Forgetting creates space. It allows your mind to focus on what appears most relevant. The challenge is that relevance isn't always determined by logic. Emotion plays a huge role. Novelty plays a role. Repetition plays a role. Meaning plays a role. This is why emotionally intense experiences often stay with you for years, and why entire months of ordinary life can blur together. The brain isn't recording importance according to objective standards. It's recording importance according to what captures attention. This is where many people begin to understand themselves differently. You may not remember every experience you've had, but every experience has contributed something. A pattern, a lesson, an association, a preference, a reaction. Even when the memory itself disappears from awareness, the effect often remains. That's one of the most fascinating aspects of the human mind. You don't need to consciously remember every experience for it to shape who you become. In fact, much of who you are today was built from experiences you rarely think about anymore. Conscious awareness is only the visible tip of the system. Beneath it sits an enormous amount of processing, learning, and adaptation happening continuously throughout your life. And once you understand how small conscious awareness really is, a new question naturally emerges. If so much learning happens beneath awareness, what exactly is your brain storing all this time? Your brain records more than you think. Once you understand that your conscious awareness is limited, the next question becomes obvious. If you're only aware of a small portion of what's happening in your mind, what exactly is the rest of your brain doing? A lot more than you think. Most people assume they remember very little. They look back on their life and see large gaps. Entire years feel blurry. Important conversations disappear. Names are forgotten. Details fade. And because those memories aren't immediately available, they conclude that the information is gone. But memory doesn't work like a video archive. Your brain is not storing perfect recordings of your life. It's storing information in pieces, fragments, patterns, associations, connections. Imagine taking apart a house and storing every piece separately. The windows go into one room. The doors go into another. The furniture goes somewhere else. The wiring is stored elsewhere. At first glance, it no longer looks like a house, but the components still exist. Memory works in a similar way. When something happens, your brain doesn't simply press save. Different parts of the experience are processed by different systems. The sights, the sounds, the emotions, the meaning, the context, the people involved, the physical sensations. All of these pieces become connected through networks of neurons. Later, when you remember an event, your brain reconstructs it from those pieces. This is why memories can feel incomplete. It's also why memories can be triggered unexpectedly. A smell, a song, a street corner, a phrase someone says. Suddenly, a memory you haven't thought about in years appears out of nowhere. The memory wasn't hiding inside the smell. The smell simply activated part of the network connected to that experience. The rest followed. This happens constantly, and it reveals something important. Your brain is storing far more than your conscious mind regularly accesses. Think about your childhood. You probably cannot list every teacher you ever had. You probably cannot remember every classroom. You probably cannot recall every friend. Yet if someone showed you old photographs, yearbooks, or familiar locations, entire clusters of memories might suddenly return. Not because they were recreated, because they were already there. They simply needed the right path to become accessible. This distinction matters, because many people mistake lack of access for lack of knowledge. These are not the same thing. You may know something without being able to immediately recall it. You may have learned something without realizing it became part of you. You may have developed capabilities without consciously tracking their development. This happens every day. Consider language. You know thousands upon thousands of words. You understand complex sentence structures. You instinctively recognize grammar mistakes. You can detect when a sentence sounds strange. Yet most people couldn't explain the rules behind every decision they make while speaking. The knowledge exists, but much of it operates below conscious awareness. The same thing happens with social skills. You can often sense tension in a room before anyone says a word. You can detect confidence, uncertainty, discomfort, or enthusiasm from subtle signals. You can often predict how a conversation will unfold. Most of the time, you couldn't explain every piece of information your brain used to reach those conclusions. Yet somehow, the conclusion arrives. That isn't magic. It's accumulated pattern recognition. Your brain has spent years collecting data, millions of interactions, millions of observations, millions of tiny lessons. most of which you never consciously cataloged. This is one reason experience becomes so valuable over time. Not because experienced people remember more facts, because they possess more patterns. A beginner sees isolated events. An experienced person sees familiar structures. They've encountered similar situations before. Their brain recognizes similarities even when the details are different. This often appears as intuition. People say things like, "I just had a feeling. I can't explain it. Something seemed off." In many cases, what feels like intuition is actually unconscious pattern recognition. The brain notices signals before conscious awareness catches up. Not always, but often. The challenge is that we tend to trust only what we can consciously explain. If we can't describe where a thought came from, we dismiss it. If we can't immediately recall information, we assume we don't know it. If we can't point to a specific lesson, we underestimate its influence. This creates a distorted picture of ourselves. Because the majority of your learning doesn't happen through memorization. It happens through exposure, repetition, observation, experience. Your brain is constantly collecting information from your environment. It notices relationships between events. It tracks outcomes. It compares situations. It updates predictions. And it does this whether you're paying attention or not. Think about how many faces you've seen throughout your life. How many conversations you've overheard. How many stories you've consumed. How many environments you've experienced. The number is enormous. You don't consciously remember most of it, but your brain has been learning from all of it. This realization changes how you should think about growth. Growth is not always visible. Many people expect learning to feel obvious. They want immediate proof that progress is happening. But much of the most important learning is invisible while it's occurring. The mind gathers pieces for months or years before they suddenly connect. A concept you've struggled with for years may become clear in a single moment. A problem you've thought about endlessly may suddenly reveal an answer during a walk. An idea may appear fully formed after a long period where nothing seemed to be happening. From the outside, it looks sudden. In reality, your brain has been building toward that moment for a very long time. The insight is simply the first part you consciously notice. This is why patience matters more than people think. Not because progress is slow, because much of progress happens underground. You don't always see the roots while they're growing. You only notice the result once it breaks the surface. And the truth is that your mind has likely been building far more than you realize. Learning more than you notice. Connecting more than you notice. Remembering more than you notice. The question isn't whether your brain is recording information. It is. The more useful question is how much of your current behavior is being shaped by experiences you no longer consciously remember. The hidden memories influencing your life. At this point, it's tempting to think of memory as something that matters only when you can consciously recall it. If you remember it, it matters. If you forget it, it doesn't. But that's not how your mind works. In many cases, the memories you can't easily access continue influencing your life long after you've stopped consciously thinking about them. This is where things become both fascinating and practical, because we're no longer talking about remembering names or facts. We're talking about the hidden experiences that shape how you see the world, how you react to challenges, how you build relationships, how you view yourself. Most people imagine influence as something obvious. They assume that if an experience affected them, they would know exactly how and why. The reality is usually much quieter. Imagine a child who is constantly encouraged whenever they try something difficult, not necessarily praised for results, simply encouraged for effort. Over time, that child develops an expectation. Difficult things are worth attempting. Mistakes are survivable. Growth is normal. Years later, that person may have no conscious memory of hundreds of those moments. But the pattern remains. The lesson became part of how they approach life. Now imagine the opposite. A child who repeatedly learns that mistakes lead to embarrassment, that criticism arrives faster than support, that failure feels dangerous. Again, the individual may not consciously remember every event, but the emotional pattern can remain active for decades. The mind doesn't only store events, it stores expectations, and expectations often become invisible. You stop noticing them because they feel like reality. This is one reason two people can experience the same situation very differently. One person sees an opportunity, another sees a threat. One person interprets feedback as useful information, another interprets it as rejection. One person sees uncertainty as exciting, Another sees uncertainty as dangerous. The external situation may be identical. The internal patterns are different, and many of those patterns were built long ago, long before either person consciously understood what was happening. This doesn't mean your past controls your future, but it does mean your past contributes to the lens through which you view the present. The important distinction is that influence is not destiny. A hidden pattern can influence you without permanently defining you. In fact, many of the most important breakthroughs in life happen when people finally become aware of patterns that were operating automatically. Think about how often someone says, "I don't know why I keep doing this." That's usually not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that unconscious patterns are running faster than conscious awareness. The behavior appears first. The explanation comes later. This happens with confidence, relationships, money, health, creative work, career decisions. People often assume their choices are entirely rational. Then they discover that old fears, assumptions, and emotional memories have been quietly shaping those choices all along. Not because they're irrational, because they're human. Your brain is designed to use past experiences to predict future outcomes. That is one of its most important jobs. If something previously led to pain, your brain becomes cautious. If something previously led to reward, your brain becomes more willing to repeat it. Most of the time, this system is incredibly useful. You don't need to relearn every lesson from scratch. You carry forward what you've already experienced. But sometimes the system becomes outdated. A lesson that once protected you may begin limiting you. A belief that once made sense may stop serving you. A reaction that was useful in one environment may become unnecessary in another. The challenge is that these patterns rarely announce themselves. They feel normal. They feel obvious. They feel like just the way things are. This is why self-awareness can be so powerful. Not because it magically solves problems, because it allows you to see what was previously invisible. The moment you notice a pattern, you create a small amount of distance from it. Instead of automatically following it, you can examine it. You can ask questions. Where did this assumption come from? Is it still accurate? Is it helping me? What evidence supports it? What evidence challenges it? Many people spend years trying to change behaviors without understanding the patterns underneath them. That's like trimming weeds without touching the roots. Temporary improvement happens, then the behavior returns. Real change often starts deeper, at the level of assumptions, expectations, interpretations, the hidden mental models built from years of accumulated experience. The encouraging part is that awareness changes the equation. A pattern can influence you without controlling you. Once you see it, you gain options. You gain flexibility. You gain choice. And this is where understanding memory becomes more than an interesting psychological fact. It becomes a practical tool, because the goal isn't to remember every detail of your life. The goal is to understand that forgotten experiences may still be shaping present behavior. Not so you can blame the past, not so you can endlessly analyze yourself, but so you can better understand why certain reactions feel automatic, why certain fears feel convincing, why certain habits seem difficult to break. When you understand that your brain is carrying forward lessons from experiences you barely remember, you become less confused by your own behavior. You stop treating every reaction as a mystery. You start seeing patterns. And once you can see the patterns, you can begin deciding which ones deserve to come with you into the future. Why you forget most of your life. At first glance, forgetting seems like a flaw. You forget names. You forget birthdays. You forget where you left your keys. You forget conversations that once felt important. You forget entire periods of your life. And because forgetting feels frustrating, most people assume a perfect memory would be better. It sounds appealing. Imagine remembering every detail of every day, every conversation, every face, every experience. Nothing lost, nothing forgotten. But when researchers study people with unusually powerful autobiographical memory, something interesting appears. Remembering everything is not always an advantage. In many cases, it's exhausting. Because memory isn't just a storage problem. It's a management problem. Your brain is not trying to preserve every detail. It's trying to preserve what is useful. This is one of the most important shifts you can make in understanding how your mind works. The purpose of memory is not accuracy. The purpose of memory is adaptation. Your brain evolved to help you navigate reality, not to become a perfect historical archive. Imagine moving to a new city. On your first day, every street feels unfamiliar. Every building feels important. Every turn demands attention. But after living there for several years, most of those details disappear into the background. You no longer consciously process every road sign. You no longer study every building. Your brain keeps what is necessary and lets the rest fade. Not because it failed, because it succeeded. The information became unnecessary. Forgetting is often evidence of efficiency. Think about your daily routine. How many times have you brushed your teeth, opened a door, walked through a hallway, sat down at a table? The number is impossible to count. If your brain stored every single occurrence with equal importance, retrieving useful information would become much harder. Important signals would drown in noise. So your brain compresses. It summarizes. It extracts patterns. Instead of preserving every individual event, it often preserves the lesson, the meaning, the prediction, the expectation. This explains why many people remember emotional moments more clearly than ordinary ones. Emotion acts as a signal. It tells the brain, this matters. Pay attention. Store this. A highly emotional experience creates stronger memory traces because the brain assumes the information may be useful in the future. Not because emotional events are objectively more important, because they may have greater survival value. The same system explains why many ordinary experiences vanish so quickly. Your brain simply doesn't see a reason to dedicate resources to preserving them. And honestly, most of the time, that's the correct decision. Imagine trying to remember every meal you've ever eaten, every article you've ever read, every advertisement you've ever seen, every stranger you've ever walked past. The amount of information would be overwhelming. You would spend more time sorting through memory than living your life. The mind solves this problem by being selective. Not perfect, selective. This is why forgetting should not automatically be interpreted as loss. Often, it is transformation. The experience disappears in one form and remains in another. You may forget a specific conversation, yet retain the lesson it taught. You may forget the details of a book, yet continue using ideas from it years later. You may forget who gave you advice, yet still live according to that advice. The information changed shape. The surface details faded. The deeper pattern remained. This is something many people misunderstand about learning. They judge their progress based on recall. If they can't remember every detail, they assume they learned nothing. But learning is not the same thing as memorization. Think about the books you've read over the last decade. Could you summarize every chapter? Probably not. Yet those books may have shaped how you think, how you work, how you solve problems, how you understand people. The influence remains even when the details disappear. This is because the brain often prioritizes integration over recollection. It cares less about preserving exact information and more about updating its internal model of reality. In simple terms, your brain asks, what should I do differently because of this experience? More often than, how can I perfectly remember this experience? That's a very different objective, and it explains why growth can feel invisible. You may be changing in meaningful ways without noticing it. You may be learning things you cannot yet articulate. You may be becoming wiser without feeling smarter, because your brain is constantly extracting useful patterns while discarding unnecessary detail. The process feels like forgetting, but underneath, something else is happening. The mind is simplifying reality into something it can efficiently use. Of course, forgetting is not always helpful. Sometimes important memories fade. Sometimes useful knowledge becomes difficult to access. Sometimes experiences become distorted. The memory system is imperfect, but perfection was never the goal. Functionality was. The remarkable thing is not that you forget so much. The remarkable thing is that your brain can take millions of experiences, compress them into usable patterns, and continue helping you navigate situations you've never encountered before. That ability is one of the reasons human beings can adapt so effectively. We don't carry every detail forward. We carry the lessons. And once you understand that, forgetting starts to look less like a weakness and more like a feature of a system designed to keep moving forward. Skills you know but can't explain. One of the clearest examples of your mind storing more than you can consciously access is skill. Not knowledge, not facts. Skill. Because skills reveal something most people never stop to think about. You can know how to do something without knowing how you do it. At first, that sounds contradictory, but your everyday life is filled with examples. Take walking. You learned how to walk years ago. Today, you can stand up and move across a room without consciously calculating balance. weight distribution, muscle activation, or coordination. Yet all of those processes are happening. If someone asked you to explain every adjustment your body makes while walking, you couldn't do it. Not because you lack the skill, because the skill exists below conscious awareness. The same thing happens when you ride a bicycle. When you first learn, every movement requires attention. You wobble, you overcorrect, you think about balance constantly. Then something changes. The skill becomes automatic. Years later, you can ride without thinking about it. You may even struggle to teach it. Not because you're bad at riding, because you've become so good that the process no longer requires conscious access. This is a strange feature of expertise. The better you become at something, the less visible many of its components become. The skill moves underground. It becomes part of your operating system. Instead of actively thinking about each step, your brain handles the process automatically. Driving is another example. Remember your first driving lesson. You probably felt overwhelmed. Every mirror mattered. Every sign mattered. Every movement demanded attention. Your conscious mind was involved in everything. Now think about an experienced driver. They can navigate traffic, hold a conversation, listen to a podcast, and arrive at their destination with little conscious effort. The underlying skill didn't disappear. The brain simply optimized it. This is one of the mind's greatest strengths. It takes repeated actions and transforms them into automatic capabilities. What begins as conscious effort eventually becomes unconscious competence. This process happens everywhere. Typing, speaking, reading, cooking, playing sports, creating art, solving problems, leading teams, building businesses. At first, every action feels deliberate. Then repetition changes the structure of the skill. The brain starts recognizing familiar patterns. It develops shortcuts. It reduces cognitive load. Eventually, what once felt difficult feels natural. The problem is that people often stop appreciating skills once they become automatic. They only notice what still feels hard. Think about how often you've done this. You compare yourself to someone more advanced and immediately focus on your shortcomings. Meanwhile, you ignored dozens of abilities that once required years of practice. Because those abilities now feel effortless. Effortlessness creates invisibility. The better you become at something, the more likely you are to underestimate it. This is especially common in creative work. Writers forget how difficult writing once felt. Designers forget how confusing design principles once seemed. Programmers forget what it felt like to look at code for the first time. Experts often assume everyone sees what they see, but they don't. Years of accumulated patterns have changed how the expert perceives reality. The knowledge has become integrated. This matters because many people evaluate themselves unfairly. They measure capability based on conscious awareness. If they can't immediately explain a skill, they assume they don't possess it. If something feels easy, they assume it isn't valuable. If a task feels natural, they assume everyone can do it. None of those assumptions are true. What feels obvious to you may be the result of thousands of hours of hidden learning. The brain is constantly compressing experience into usable patterns. Eventually, those patterns become automatic. And automatic often feels ordinary. But ordinary does not mean insignificant. A skilled musician hears things a beginner misses. A skilled negotiator notices signals others overlook. A skilled teacher recognizes confusion before a student says a word. A skilled entrepreneur spots opportunities hidden inside problems. In many cases, they cannot fully explain every piece of information their brain is processing. The recognition happens too quickly, too automatically, too deeply integrated. This is why intuition often improves with experience. Not because experienced people become magical, because their brains have collected more patterns, more examples, more repetitions, more situations. When a familiar structure appears, recognition happens almost instantly. Conscious explanation comes later, if it comes at all. This should change how you think about your own development. Growth is not always visible. Sometimes growth looks like increased awareness. Sometimes it looks like improved understanding. But often, growth looks like effort becoming unnecessary. The skill is still there. It's simply operating at a different level. The irony is that many people spend years trying to become more confident while ignoring evidence that they're already more capable than they realize. Their skills have become normal. Their growth has become familiar. Their progress has become invisible. And because it feels invisible, they assume it doesn't exist. But your life is full of abilities that once seemed impossible. abilities you can now perform without thinking. That transformation didn't happen by accident. Your brain built it, one repetition at a time, one experience at a time, one lesson at a time, until the knowledge stopped feeling like knowledge and started feeling like part of who you are. And that's one of the strongest examples of the central idea running through this entire discussion. Your mind contains far more than your conscious awareness can access. Not just memories, not just information, entire capabilities that continue serving you every day, even when you can no longer see the process that created them. Your brain learns patterns without permission. Most people think learning is something they do intentionally. You study, you practice, you pay attention, you memorize, you improve. That's certainly one form of learning, but it's far from the only form. In reality, some of the most important learning in your life happen without your permission, without your awareness, and often without any deliberate effort at all. Your brain is constantly looking for patterns. Not because you're trying to learn, because that's what brains do. They search for regularities, relationships, predictions, cause and effect, anything that helps make future situations easier to navigate. The remarkable part is how much of this happens automatically. Think about language. When you were a child, nobody handed you a complete manual explaining grammar. Nobody gave you a detailed map of sentence structure. Nobody required you to consciously memorize every rule before speaking. Instead, your brain absorbed patterns. Thousands of conversations, thousands of examples, thousands of repetitions. Slowly, without conscious effort, your mind began recognizing what sounded right and what sounded wrong. Years later, you can often spot a grammatical mistake instantly. Yet many people cannot explain the exact rule being violated. The pattern exists. The explanation does not. This distinction matters because it reveals something important about how learning actually works. Much of learning is not stored as facts. It's stored as pattern recognition. The brain becomes familiar with structures long before it can describe them. The same thing happens socially. You weren't given a formal textbook on human interaction, yet somehow you've learned how conversations flow. You've learned when someone is bored. You've learned when someone is excited. You've learned when someone feels uncomfortable. You've learned when someone is hiding something. Not perfectly, but often surprisingly well. How? Through exposure, through repetition, through observation. Your brain collected examples for years and gradually built internal models. You didn't consciously track every lesson. The brain did it for you. This process explains why certain things can feel obvious even when you struggle to explain them. A person walks into a room and something feels off. They can't immediately identify why, but later they discover tension, conflict, dishonesty, or discomfort was present. Their brain noticed signals before conscious awareness assembled the explanation. The same thing happens in creative work. A writer reads thousands of stories. A designer studies thousands of images. A musician hears thousands of songs. Eventually, they develop instincts. Certain choices feel right. Certain choices feel wrong. Not because they consciously analyzed every example, because repeated exposure trained pattern recognition. This is one reason beginners often misunderstand experts. The beginner wants rules. The expert often sees patterns. The beginner asks, "What should I do?" The expert asks, "What kind of situation is this?" The difference is subtle but important. Rules help when situations are predictable. Patterns help when reality becomes complicated. And reality is almost always more complicated than rules can capture. This automatic pattern learning influences far more than skills and expertise. It shapes your expectations, your confidence, your assumptions, your perception of what's normal. Consider someone who grows up surrounded by people who start businesses. Taking risks feels normal. Creating opportunities feels normal. Experimenting feels normal. Now imagine someone who grows up in an environment where stability is emphasized above everything else. The same decision may feel completely different. Neither person consciously chose those perceptions. Their brains absorbed patterns from the environment. This happens everywhere. The people around you, the content you consume, the conversations you hear, the problems you solve, the environments you repeatedly enter. Your brain treats repetition as evidence. If something appears often enough, the mind assumes it matters. This is one reason your environment influences you more than you think. You don't merely observe your environment. You learn from it. Constantly, quietly, automatically. This realization can be uncomfortable. Because it means you're being shaped by influences you don't always notice. But it can also be empowering. Because it means learning is happening even when progress feels invisible. Many people become discouraged because they expect growth to be obvious. They expect clear signs, clear milestones, clear proof. But much of the brain's learning process happens beneath awareness. The patterns are accumulating long before the results become visible. A person learning a new skill often feels stuck. Day after day, improvement seems non-existent. Then suddenly something clicks. Performance improves. Understanding deepens. Confidence increases. From the outside, it appears sudden. Inside the brain, it was gradual. The pattern had been forming for weeks or months. The conscious breakthrough simply arrived later. This is why patience matters. Not because nothing is happening, because something is happening that you cannot yet see. Your brain is constantly collecting examples and building internal models. Sometimes the work is visible, often it isn't. And this leads to one of the most important ideas in this entire discussion. You are not only shaped by what you consciously remember, you are shaped by what you repeatedly experience. Whether you notice it or not, whether you intend it or not, whether you can explain it or not, the patterns surrounding you today are quietly becoming part of the person you will be tomorrow. Which means one of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is not, what am I thinking? But, what patterns am I exposing myself to every day? Because your brain is learning from them regardless of whether you're paying attention. The hidden forces behind your decisions. At this point, something should already be becoming clear. Your mind is not waiting for you to consciously analyze every situation before acting. In many cases, the decision is already forming before you are aware a decision is being made. What you experience as choice is often the final step in a process that started earlier, beneath awareness. This is not about removing control from you. It's about understanding where your control actually begins. Think about a simple moment. You walk into a room and immediately feel comfortable or uncomfortable. Before you think about it, before you analyze it, before you explain it, a reaction appears. Only afterward do you try to justify it. I don't like this place. I feel good here. I'm not sure why, but something feels off. Most people assume these reactions are random. They're not. They are the result of accumulated patterns your brain has learned over time. Your brain is constantly predicting outcomes based on past experience. If a situation resembles something that previously led to stress, your system becomes cautious. If it resembles something that previously led to reward, your system becomes open. This happens extremely fast. Faster than language. Faster than deliberate thought. Faster than explanation. By the time you become consciously aware of a feeling, your brain has already processed thousands of subtle signals. Tone of voice, body language, context, timing, memory associations, environmental cues. None of this is processed as separate pieces in your awareness. It arrives as a single impression, a feeling, a sense, a direction. Then your conscious mind steps in and tries to interpret it. This is where people often misunderstand themselves. They think they are deciding first, then feeling later. But in many cases, the sequence is reversed. Feeling first, explanation second, decision last. This doesn't mean your choices are meaningless. It means your choices are shaped by deeper systems than your conscious mind alone. And those systems are built from everything you've experienced. This is why two people can respond completely differently to the same situation. One person sees risk, another sees opportunity. One person feels tension, another feels excitement. One person moves forward, another pulls back. The situation is identical, but the internal pattern history is not. Your brain is not reacting to the present moment alone. It is reacting to the present moment filtered through everything that has happened before it. This is also why habits feel automatic. A habit is not just a repeated action. It is a learned shortcut. The brain says, we've done this before. We know what happens next. We don't need full awareness for this. So it compresses the process. It removes friction. It reduces effort. And you experience it as something you just do. But that just hides a long history of repetition and reinforcement. This applies to emotional reactions as well. Certain tones of voice can trigger irritation. Certain types of feedback can trigger defensiveness. Certain situations can trigger anxiety before you even understand why. These responses often feel immediate because they are stored as fast access patterns, not as thoughts, as reactions. and reactions bypass explanation. This is why people often struggle to change their behavior using logic alone. Logic operates at the conscious level, but many decisions originate below it. If the underlying pattern has not changed, the behavior often repeats itself even when you understand it intellectually. This is the gap between awareness and transformation. You can see a pattern clearly, but still feel pulled into it. Not because you are weak, but because the system generating the response is older, faster, and more practiced than your conscious reasoning. The goal is not to fight this system. The goal is to understand it. Because once you see how decisions are formed, you stop treating every reaction as absolute truth. You start seeing them as outputs of a process. And processes can be examined, questioned, updated. This is where change becomes possible, not by forcing new behavior immediately, but by recognizing the patterns that are producing the old behavior. Once awareness enters the system begins to loosen. Not instantly, but gradually, because awareness creates space between stimulus and reaction. And in that space, something new becomes possible, unlocking information you forgot you had. One of the most surprising things about the human mind is this. You don't actually retrieve memories the way you retrieve files from a folder. You rebuild them. And that means access depends heavily on context. Not effort, not willpower. Context. Think about how often you've had this experience. You're trying to remember a name. You strain for it. Nothing comes. Then you stop trying. You move on. And later, sometimes hours later, the name suddenly appears in your mind without effort. It didn't arrive because you tried harder. It arrived because your brain relaxed and found a better pathway. This is how memory access actually works. Your brain stores information in networks, and networks respond to cues. A smell, a sound, a place, a similar idea, a related emotion. When the right cue appears, it activates connected patterns. And suddenly, what felt lost becomes accessible again. This is why memory often feels inconsistent. It's not that your memory is unreliable. It's that access points are uneven. Some paths are strong, some are weak. Some are temporarily blocked by competing activity in your mind. This also explains why your environment plays a huge role in what you can think of at any moment. If you sit in the same place where you studied something, recall becomes easier. If you hear a familiar song from a specific time in your life, memories linked to that period surface more easily. Your brain is not searching randomly. It is responding to structure. Now extend this idea further. It doesn't just apply to explicit memories like facts or names. It also applies to emotional and conceptual understanding. Sometimes you understand something in theory, but it doesn't feel real yet. Then one day, a real-life situation activates the right internal connections, and suddenly the idea clicks in a deeper way. Nothing new was added. Something already there became accessible. This is a critical distinction. Access is not the same as acquisition. You may already have more understanding than you can currently feel, more insight than you can currently articulate, more knowledge than you can currently express. But without the right cues, it remains inactive. This is also why revisiting old material can feel surprisingly powerful. A book you read years ago might hit differently the second time, not because the book changed, because you changed. Your internal network has changed. So new connections become possible. New meanings emerge. This is how growth often works in practice. Not linear accumulation, but reaccessing what was already partially built, layering new understanding on top of existing structure. This is also why people underestimate their own capability. They assume that if they can't produce an answer instantly, they don't know it. But in many cases, the information is there. It just hasn't been activated by the right conditions yet. This changes how you should think about learning itself. Learning is not only about adding more. It's also about creating better access to what already exists in your mind. Stronger cues, clearer associations, more repeated connections. The more pathways you build to the same idea, the easier it becomes to reach it later. This is why practice matters more than rereading. Each exposure strengthens retrieval routes. Each repetition builds familiarity. Each real application anchors the idea into more contexts. Over time, access becomes effortless, and what once felt distant becomes immediate. The key realization is simple but powerful. You are not as far from your knowledge as you think. Much of what you need is already inside you. The challenge is not always learning more. It is learning how to reach what is already there. Your brain is bigger than your awareness. If you step back and look at everything you've just explored, a single pattern becomes hard to ignore. Your mind is doing far more work than your awareness can track. Not occasionally, constantly. At every level we've discussed, the same structure keeps appearing. You experience only a small slice of what your brain is processing. You can only consciously hold a fraction of what you've learned. You can only actively access a portion of what you've stored. And yet, your life runs on all of it at once. Not just the part you can describe. This is the part most people miss when they think about themselves. They assume me is the voice in their head, the thoughts they can articulate, the memories they can recall on demand. But that is not the full system. That is just the interface. Underneath that interface is a much larger operation. A continuous process of pattern recognition, prediction, filtering, compression, and reconstruction. Most of it happens silently, without language, without awareness, without interruption. And yet it shapes everything you do. The way you react to people, the way you interpret situations, the way you make decisions, the way you move through uncertainty. Even when you feel unsure, your brain is not inactive. It is still running comparisons, still drawing from past experience, still generating probabilities based on patterns you've accumulated over time. This is why human behavior is often more consistent than people realize. Even when someone thinks they are acting randomly, their brain is usually following deeply established patterns. Not because they lack control, but because patterns are efficient. And efficiency is what the brain prioritizes. This brings everything back to a simple idea. You are not operating with a blank mind in each moment. You are operating with a heavily trained system. A system shaped by years of experience. Most of it forgotten in detail, but preserved in structure. That structure is what you feel as intuition, as habit, as personality, as instinct, as preference, and as avoidance. When people say this is just who I am, they are often describing the output of this system. But what they are really describing is accumulated experience organized into patterns, not something fixed, something built. And anything that is built can, in principle, be reshaped. Not quickly, not always easily, but it is not static. This is where the idea becomes practical instead of just interesting. Because once you understand that your conscious mind is only a small part of the system, you stop expecting change to happen purely through awareness alone. You stop thinking insight is enough. You stop assuming that understanding something logically will immediately change how you behave. Instead, you start seeing why repetition matters, why environment matters, why exposure matters, why practice matters. Because those are the tools that actually interact with the deeper system. They are what reshape the patterns underneath awareness, not just the thoughts on top. And this is also where patience becomes a different kind of skill, not passive waiting, but trust in a process you cannot fully see while it is happening. Because much of your development does not announce itself in real time. It shows up later, after enough repetition, after enough exposure, after enough small adjustments that felt insignificant at the time. Then one day, you notice a difference in how you think, or how you react, or how you understand something that used to confuse you, and it feels like a sudden shift. But it wasn't sudden. It was accumulated. This is the reality behind the phrase. Your mind stores more than you can access. It is not just about memory. It is about scale. Your awareness is small compared to the total system running beneath it. But that system is not separate from you. It is you, operating at depth. And once you understand that, you start relating to yourself differently. Less as a fixed identity, more as an evolving system, shaped continuously by what you experience, and quietly carrying far more than you can currently see. Closing perspective. If there's one thing to take from all of this, it's not a technique. It's a shift in how you see yourself. You are not only the thoughts you can articulate, not only the memories you can recall, not only the decisions you can explain. You are also the patterns you cannot currently see, the reactions that happen before explanation, the skills that operate without awareness, the memories that exist without access, the learning that happened without intention. All of it is still part of your system, even when it's invisible to you in the moment. This means something important. You don't need to perfectly understand yourself in real time to be growing. You don't need full access to your mind to be changing. You don't need constant awareness to be developing. Much of what makes you capable is already built beneath awareness. And much of what is shaping you right now is not yet visible to you. So instead of treating your mind like something small that needs to be forced into improvement, it may be more accurate to see it as something large that is already learning constantly. Your job is not to control every layer. That's impossible. Your job is to influence the system through what you repeatedly expose it to, because that is what it is always responding to, even when you are not paying attention, even when you are not trying, even when you are not aware. And over time, those small inputs become structure, and that structure becomes behavior, and that behavior becomes identity, not in a fixed way, but in a continuously updating way, which means you are never as stuck as you feel in a single moment, and never as unaware as you assume. You are always in transition, even when it doesn't look like it yet. Final note, there's a tendency to look at your mind as something you need to fully understand before you can trust it. But that expectation is backwards. You don't need full visibility to function. You already don't have it, and you never did. Your brain has always been doing far more than your awareness can track, and yet it has carried you through every day of your life up to this point. That alone should tell you something important about how much is already working in the background. The goal is not to bring everything into consciousness. The goal is to stop underestimating what is already happening beneath it. Because when you do, you start making different decisions about how you live. You pay more attention to what you repeatedly expose yourself to. You stop dismissing small changes that haven't shown results yet. You start respecting the slow accumulation of experience instead of only trusting obvious breakthroughs. And you realize that most of what you will become is already being shaped right now, in ways you cannot fully see. That's not something to control perfectly. It's something to understand clearly. And once you do, you stop treating yourself like a fixed snapshot. You start seeing yourself as an ongoing process, always building, always updating, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Even when you can't see it yet. Closing message. If you take nothing else from this, take this. Your experience of yourself is always smaller than the system actually running you. Not in a way that removes responsibility, but in a way that explains why change is slower, deeper, and more layered than it often feels. You are not starting from zero in any moment. You are building on everything that came before it. Most of it you can't fully see, but it's there. In your reactions, in your instincts, in your habits, in your assumptions, in your sense of what feels familiar, safe, or uncertain. And because of that, your life is never shaped only by what you decide consciously. It is shaped by what you repeatedly experience, what you repeatedly practice, what you repeatedly allow into your attention. So the real leverage is not in trying to control every thought. It's in paying attention to the inputs that shape the thoughts over time. Because your mind is always learning. Even now. Even here, even when you are not trying.